Madam Vice Prime Minister, distinguished leaders, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege to be here to share with you some thoughts and some experience for about 20 to 25 years of working mostly in the North and South American context in large-scale organizational transformation projects. And it's a pleasure to be able to do this here today in Central Asia. So I'm going to talk about my presentation. Actually dovetails nicely with what Nevin just talked about in terms of leadership, but it also focuses on the three parts to it that I'll talk about today: transformational, organizational transformations, and what the leadership role is in those transformations. I'll talk about operational excellence, mainly based on lean thinking, lean techniques which came out of Toyota many, many years ago, and how those techniques are being used so successfully in not just manufacturing, but non-manufacturing sectors, including government, healthcare, education, and so on. And I'll talk about a couple of enabling technologies which are low cost, but drive significant improvement in operational efficiency in organizations globally. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it doesn't matter what kind of transformation you're going through. Studies have shown that 65 to 75% of large-scale transformations are going to fail. Now, when we say that they're going to fail, that does not mean that you're not going to be able to see any value from it. There are, excuse me, many complexities in implementing transformations, whether it's digital transformation, whether it's strategic transformation, process change, cultural transformation. These, there are many issues that actually result in organizations not being able to fully meet their objectives that they set out to be. And there are many examples. Even organizations like GE, Procter & Gamble, Ford have suffered from not being able to make or achieve those transformational objectives that they wanted to. One of the key outcomes, not just of leadership involvement, or lack of it sometimes in transformation, but leadership involvement in how work actually gets done in organizations. What we find that leadership behavior and mindset is so critical to successful transformations and successful operations, if you like, that without that, no matter how much money you spend, how many resources you mobilize, you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. And we constantly find that leadership is not engaged. They're not engaged in day-to-day work in terms of how the work is getting done, how the workforce is developing, and there are reasons. And I'll share with you some of the analysis that we have been able to perform. And we know that all organizations, the imperatives for change are significant. And this part of the world is not immune from this. Technological-driven, demographic-driven imperatives, data, we talk a lot about data and so on. So these challenges bring about a need for leadership to be fully engaged, much more so than they have traditionally been. Now, we tend to hire, sometimes not hire, but we tend to promote our technical people to leadership positions because they are so good technically. But they don't have leadership skills a lot of times. We put them through management training. A lot of the conventional management training is no longer effective in how organizations or how successful that leadership style is going to be in today's environment. And what we are finding is that, and this is a quote from from many years ago from Ken Blanchard, and it's still relevant today, that it's all about influence and not about authority. in so many organizations that I've worked in, we continue to see managers working in a very prescriptive manner, in a very controlling manner, and that style does not work anymore. It doesn't work with the millennial generation that's coming up into the workforce. It doesn't work with the pace of change that's going on in politically and technologically and socially. So leadership behaviors and skills are an important aspect of any change or any transformation that you will undertake. Now, I have spent almost 20 to 25 years of my career working in globally. I was part of PricewaterhouseCoopers for a good part of that career, a global consulting company, and I worked in Europe, North America, South America, and we see the same story repeat over and over again. And we spent some time to understand how leaders are spending their time. So I actually sat down with a number of leaders in a number of organizations and to try to understand what does a day in the life of a senior executive or a mid-level manager look like. Now, I don't know if you can guess, but what does that blue large piece of that pie represent? What do you think? And that's a deputy minister, assistant deputy minister position, which would be either a CEO or a senior vice president position in a corporation. That is time spent in a meeting, okay, or meetings. Now, I'm not sure if you can read all of that, but between the amount of time spent in meetings and time spent on emails, that represents the biggest chunk of their time. We literally took the last 2 years of Outlook calendar data, we identified what those meetings were, were they relevant, not relevant. We found half of the meetings were actually not relevant or could have been done differently. The other half of the meetings could have been done in half the time that they actually spent in those meetings. Now, when we go further down the level, when we go down to the next level of management, the picture doesn't look very, very different. It's still very similar. Now, from my perspective, when I look at this kind of information, and when I wear my operational excellence hat, which is from a lean thinking perspective, both being in meetings and doing emails is considered non-value-added time, right? Because you are not in front of customers, you are not in front of your employees, you are spending time doing something that is either to do with fixing a problem that exists somewhere. So why did those problems occur in the first place? And the idea is to try to get managers, senior managers, out of the meeting rooms onto where the work is getting done. Now that requires a significant shift in the mindsets and behaviors of leadership. And if there's one advice that I'd give you, particularly to emerging countries like Kyrgyzstan and other countries in Central Asia, is that if you want to leapfrog the Western countries, innovate your leadership in how the leadership performs work, how leadership spend their time, because that will give you a significant benefit in terms of the value in terms of growth in the organization and benefits in many other ways in terms of how those organizations will prosper. So when we talk about leadership behavior, what are we talking about? These are the leadership behaviors that we would like to see in today's leaders. Humility, not arrogance. And we tend to see many managers still working in a very authoritative manner with staff, being able to share or give credit where credit is due, being able to share blame where blame needs to be shared, admitting your mistakes, giving feedback, leading by actions, not words. And we tend to see senior leaders talking the talk, but not walking the talk. And it's not enough to just talk about what employees should or should not be doing, but being seen to be respecting people. Now, when we talk about respect, what do we mean in this leadership environment? What we mean is that you are respecting those people's experience, their knowledge, in order to deal with issues that the organization is facing. Listening to and developing people. How much time do we spend actually doing that? Coaching and mentoring. In the old days in Toyota, when the whole Toyota production system, which is the gold standard for lean thinking globally, in the old days, what they said about managers was that a manager's primary responsibility is to manufacture future managers. Well, how many managers actually spend time doing that today? So coaching and mentoring, going and seeing where the work is getting done. I've spent time in governments where people write briefing notes. I'm not sure how it works here. I'm sure it must be very similar. Amount of time and resources that are committed to doing a simple thing like that, and all for the purpose of informing a senior executive as to what's going on. Well, we have changed that in some ministries where briefing notes are not written anymore, where the deputy ministers actually come down to the staff to be given briefing verbally, and it allows them to exchange information, exchange ideas. It's a very significant shift in how work gets done, or how managers behave or work. So when we talk about leadership skills, there are a number of leadership skills that managers need to be taught, coaching and mentoring being one of them. Problem solving. How do you solve problems? Well, how do managers conventionally solve problems? They solve problems by gut feel or by using anecdotal information, or but just by their experience, perhaps. What worked last in a similar situation many years ago does not mean that a solution is going to work now. Equipping them with proper problem-solving skills, and there are lots of structured problem-solving skills that can be taught. Coaching and mentoring, developing people, we talked about that. Being aware, of course, using data for fact-based analysis. I'm going to talk a little bit about operational excellence through lean transformation, which was really where my original presentation focus was going to be. And when we talk about operational excellence, what are we talking about? We're talking about commitment to building a culture of continuous improvement in the organization, where people are continuously looking for ways to improve performance. Now, we have talked about, I've mentioned lean thinking. And lean is a business philosophy that as I mentioned, came from Japan many years ago, and it's all focused on removing waste and creating flow. And it's been used in manufacturing and has improved quality, cost, timeliness significantly in manufacturing. These techniques are now being used in healthcare, in education, in government, in finance, globally. Particularly in the West, there are very few companies that would not be using these techniques to remove waste and create flow in their business processes. And the current thinking is that we don't see the waste that happens in our organizations. For example, being in meetings for long periods of time, doing things, reworking. If someone work arrives on your desk, you see that it was not done accurately or completely, and you spend time to fix it. That's waste. Not doing the right things at the right time, using the right people. So there are 7 different types of waste that every manager needs to be able to see. And I'm happy to say that we're actually working with UCA right now in implementing some of these techniques to be able to increase efficiency and increase productivity of staff and deliver better results to the customers or the students. Now, this diagram was put together by an industrial engineer at Toyota by the name of Taiichi Ono. And what he said is that you take any work or any process in any organization, whether it's manufacturing or non-manufacturing, if you take that process apart, you analyze every activity that's involved in the process, what you'll find is that only 25% of the activities are actually adding value. 50% of the work we do is considered waste. It's considered waste because it falls in one of those 8 types of waste that I showed in my previous slide. Now, you can imagine that if you were to examine your organization to see how how much non-productive work or low-value-added work or wasteful work that's happening. If you remove all of that, how much extra capacity that you'll have to focus more on analytical work, focus on more fact-based decision-making, and create jobs that will be much more interesting, much more attractive for the generation that's coming up. I'll share a couple of case studies with you. This is Government of Saskatchewan in Canada, which undertook as part of their public service renewal strategy back in 2010, adopted lean thinking in terms to completely change how the organization delivered services to its citizens, how the government delivered services. All deputy ministers went through 2 days of training. Thousands of staff were trained. 5 years later, some of the results were staggering in terms of, and Saskatchewan is not a big province. It's very similar in size in terms of GDP to perhaps Kyrgyzstan. But there was significant savings in cost, significant amount of productivity gain that they experienced. Another example is state of Washington. Results Washington was a program that Jay Inslee, who's a governor of the state, through an executive order, implemented lean thinking throughout government in how it was going to deliver services. And they engaged companies like Boeing, Starbucks, Alaska Airlines, Microsoft, Virginia Mason, who are all in their neighborhood, in that state, to provide expertise to help them to embark on this journey. And some of the results that you can see, and they're using lean thinking to solve complex social problems, like reducing homelessness, improving graduation rates. And these are some of the results that after a few years that they were able to show. And you know, it's hard to pinpoint one thing that they did that improved this, because when we're talking about social issues, there are many, many factors that come into place. So one could argue, was it lean thinking that did this, or was it something else? But it has to be a multifactorial approach to solving complex problems, and lean thinking was one of those. So in my opinion, lean thinking and culture of continuous improvement should really underpin all business transformations that you undertake, whether it's technology-based or non-technology-based. And it's important because leadership and your staff that's what it's all about. 80% of the transformations involve people and what people do and how they work. Just on a last topic, I want to talk a little bit about some of the enabling technologies. I think we've touched here in the last day or so on robotic process automation. And I mentioned this technology because this is a fairly new technology, but well established, well proven, and very inexpensive. And RPA can be used to dramatically improve performance in business processes. And I'll very quickly go through because I've been given my cue to wrap up. Another approach is the nudge theory, which is very applicable in public sector to drive change. And how do you get the public to do things that are in their best interest? There's a lot of content available on nudge theory, which is being used extensively in organizations. In terms of my suggestions on areas that Central Asia could focus on, management and technology consulting, these are some of the areas, customer experience being one of the biggest ones, workforce transformation, and of course, lean transformation that we talked about. And just in closing, I want to give a plug to a book that I have co-authored recently on delivering results. Again, this is using lean principles, and focus is very much on public sector, but a lot of the techniques are very applicable in the private sector as well. Thank you very much.